big Supreme Court win for President Trump on immunity, while Jack Smith issues no comment. This is Logan Sekulow. We've got a packed show full of breaking news. Later on, the next segment, we're going to have my dad, Jay Sekulow, joining us later on the broadcast, Harry Hutchinson, and then towards the end of the show, Rick Rennell will be joining us. And we're talking about the legal and the political fallout of today's decision. Obviously, if you're just watching right now, the breaking news is the Supreme Court has ruled on the Trump immunity case, essentially dealing out what looks to be, and what all reports are saying, it's a hefty opinion, but what is being considered a big win for President Trump.
That's right. The court held that under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority, and he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. And then they go on to say that there is no immunity for unofficial acts. And then they go on as well to say the judgment of the Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, or for the D.C. Circuit rather, is vacated, and the case is remanded for further proceedings consistent with this opinion. So the guidance that comes out of this opinion will feed into the case at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals with Judge Chutkan, or the D.C. Circuit Court rather, and we will go now and see what happens as they have to start back there and parse out what would be an official act and what would be an unofficial act. But it really guts a lot of the case for Jack Smith, including this section here, because one of the cases is conspiracy to defraud the United States, a very broad statute. But it says on page 40 of the opinion, for instance, section 371, which has been charged in this case, is a broadly worded criminal statute that can cover, quote, any conspiracy for the purpose of impairing, obstructing, or defeating the lawful function of any department of government. Virtually every president is criticized for insufficiently enforcing some aspect of federal law, such as drug, gun, immigration, or environmental laws. An enterprising prosecutor in a new administration may assert that a previous president violated that broad statute. Without immunity, such types of prosecutions of ex-presidents could become quickly routine. The enfeebling of the presidency and our government that would result from such a cycle of factional strife is exactly what the framers intended to avoid. Ignoring those risks, the dissents are instead content to leave the preservation of our system of separated powers up to the good faith of prosecutors.
Yeah, so essentially, for those who are trying to follow along, now, what is a presidential official act? That is sort of yet to be determined. But what we can say for right now in this historic 6-3 ruling, we are delaying a lot of things, including the Jack Smith case likely. We are pushing that well beyond the election. And that's what's likely going to happen. We're going to be joined by some legal experts coming up. My dad, Jay Sekulow, will be joining us in the next segment. We're going to talk all about that coming up. Before we head to the end of this segment, today is the beginning of our Life and Liberty Drive, which means all gifts to the ACLJ are doubled, dollar for dollar. It is only through the support of you, our ACLJ members, and we need those ACLJ champions. Those are people that give on a monthly recurring basis, that we can continue to fight and win historic legal battles. Last week, we heard loud and clear what President Biden intends to do if he wins. He's going to do everything in his power to reinstate Roe. He'll continue to betray Israel. And even with today's Supreme Court victory on immunity, he will continue to wage lawfare against his political opponents. But right now, there is hope. We're sending a demand letter to the UN to defend Israel. We have a massive case against the Biden's lawfare. And we're filing a major brief to defund Planned Parenthood at the Supreme Court. Go to aclj.org right now.
Some people think champions are bored, that it's a title that requires something only a handful can ever possess.
There are times in our lives that we are called, every one of us, to step up and serve a cause greater than ourselves.
Even when the loudest voices in the room say it's wrong, that it can't be done. It can be a difficult stand, but it's one any of us can make, including you.
You can be the change. You can make that difference.
You can be a champion. We cannot do what we do without you.
By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life.
A champion of liberty, a champion of freedom.
Please join us. Become an ACLJ champion today.
Welcome back to Seculo. A ton of you are broadcasting, coming in, watching our broadcast right now, wanting to hear the breaking news. Obviously, the breaking news is a big win, or at least perceived big win out of the Supreme Court for President Trump in the case whether he has presidential immunity and whether presidential immunity is even a thing. Now we find out it is, with pretty overarching means. People were asking, well, who were the dissents? Because we said it was a 6-3. You had Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson all coming through with a dissent there. But my dad, Jay Seculo, is joining us right now. I just want to get your initial thoughts. People want your feedback of what this means and what it looks like for the future for some of these President Trump's cases.
Well, number one, it's a huge win for the president, former president, because the court not only recognized immunity, but they said there's presumptive immunity. In other words, it's presumed that the acts of the president are engaged in are official acts. And then they went through a litany of the indicted facts and said that most of those were official acts. There's only a couple that that John Roberts is sending back to the trial judge for an evidentiary hearing. And even on those, it's presumed, he says that in the order, in the opinion, it's presumed that those are official acts. By the way, the opinion tracks very closely to the brief that we filed, and it also cites frequently to the cases we argued for President Trump 4 years ago at the Supreme Court, Trump versus Vance and Trump versus Mazar. And both of those cases are cited extensively justifying the presidential immunity here. Let me tell you something that a lot of commentators are not picking up. This will end the case in Georgia against President Trump, because remember, that conversation that serves as the basis of that lawsuit, it was strictly the phone call to Brad Raffensperger. Well, under the court's analysis, that is not only presumed official act, that is an official act. So I think Fani Willis's prosecution of the president is dead.
As we look at this opinion and you couple it as well with the Fisher case that came out last week, and even on this broadcast you said the case for Jack Smith is dead there, but now you even have the broader statute he was charged with, the conspiracy to defraud the United States, and that is one of the specific charges that the court seemed very nervous about, especially in light of future presidencies. And when you look at this coupled today with what we have as well as last week, do you think that the district court even takes this at this point, or does Jack Smith have to refile in some way to try to parse this out?
Well, I think there's going to be motions to dismiss filed on the basis of the two conspiracy claims that are the basis of the decision that came out last week. So, and he can't simply refile charges. He has to re-impanel a grand jury. So I think we'll effectively, and to our audience, those cases, Jack Smith's hurdle now is, I think it's insurmountable. This is a typical of what Jack Smith does, by the way. He overcharges everything. And this is another example of that.
Let's go ahead and take a phone call. A lot of people are calling in with some questions about sort of legality and the future of some of these cases. Let's go to Angie, who's calling on line one. She's in Colorado, listening on the radio. Angie, welcome. You're on the air.
How does this case, the immunity, affect the ruling on July 11th that Merchan's going to hand down? So
for the Judge Merchan's case, how will it affect, really, how does it affect in general a lot of the cases, Dad? Maybe you could break that down a bit. How does it affect the cases moving forward, or the ruling that's coming, or even the sentencing that's coming? Does this play a factor?
Yeah, so like as I said, I think the Georgia case is totally dead, I think, as it relates to President Trump. So I think that's over with. Merchan's was a state criminal proceeding on business records. Probably doesn't apply to that at all. I think the same's true with the New York AG case. Not likely to apply here. And then it'll raise issues that I'm sure will be litigated. But I think the Georgia case, which was the next pressing case for the president, is got serious trouble. And I think Judge Cannon's case, the document case, it's also got serious trouble because he's going to argue, the president will argue, that those records were taken in the context of official acts of the presidency. Remember, they were moved down before he was still in office.
I think people keep bringing up, there's a lot of comments coming in. A lot of people are encouraged by this. And obviously, up until last week, there was dealt out some wins, some losses here. You had a big buildup of the Supreme Court where there's been a lot of pushback, whether that is on Justice Alito, whether that is on just the court. We even saw it in the debates where, President Biden said, well, he's packed it full of hardcore conservatives. But then we've seen some kind of switches in there. We've seen some wins and losses. It does feel like we actually have more of a balanced Supreme Court than the left maybe wants you to believe.
Well, last week, Logan, I think the example of that was the case involving the January 6th protesters, because you had Justice Jackson join the conservatives and Justice Barrett join the liberals. And, of course, the conservatives carried the day with Justice Jackson's vote. And she went and wrote a separate concurring opinion spelling out the importance of the case for First Amendment purposes, which again was something we argued. So you look at all of this, and you've got to realize that these are not necessarily falling on ideological lines. But I think this has been I will tell you this: I believe this is a death blow to Jack Smith's litigation. Between Friday's decision or Thursday's decisions and today's, it's a death blow to his case in Washington, D.C.
When you think of the broader implications of this, and this is one thing that I know we reference many times, that if you can start picking apart and even the broadness of the conspiracy to defraud statute, things that you don't like about what a president has done during their presidency, and then rogue prosecutors, as you've discussed many times, decide to go after a former president or even a sitting president building a case while they're in office. In one part of the opinion, it says an enterprising prosecutor in a new administration may assert that a previous president violated that broad statute, referring to Section 371. Without immunity, such types of prosecutions of ex-presidents could quickly become routine. Enfeebling the presidency and our government would result with a cycle of factional strife. Do you think that even President Biden and maybe even former President Obama are sighing a sigh of relief at this opinion?
Of course they are. I mean, I couldn't believe that he allowed the Solicitor General to argue there was no immunity, because it affects him. It affects every president. And by the way, that was very similar to the line I opened up the oral argument with in 2020 when I said 2,300 prosecutors going after a president. I said just 10% of those went after him. It'd be 230 cases. So Justice Roberts picking up the same kind of thought when he said that it allows for a new administration to come in, and then the Department of Justice starts going after the previous administration criminally. So, yeah, of course, I think at the end of the day, they're bringing a sigh of relief. I mean, the Biden administration's got other problems right now, and that's determining whether he's going to even stay in running for office. But this decision today, I think, is really good for the office of the presidency, no matter who that president is. We've always argued that the president has a unique role because it's the only branch of government where one person is the branch, and that's the executive branch, the president.
I think all the commentators, whether you're watching Fox or CNN, whatever it is, are all giving this as a big win to President Trump. Professor Hutchinson, I just want to get your initial thoughts on this opinion.
Well, I think it's important to note that this particular opinion does not necessarily establish presidential immunity. That is established by the Constitution pursuant to the separation of powers. So it's embedded within our constitutional structure that the president needs immunity in order to function properly. Otherwise, he or she would be hamstrung with respect to engaging in conduct that might indeed be seen questionable after the fact. That's number one. Number two, the happiest two individuals with respect to this opinion are Barack Obama and Joe Biden, because essentially their conduct, particularly official conduct, is now subject to immunity, and the Supreme Court has made that very, very clear. Thirdly, I would argue that Justice Roberts was very intent on establishing this principle for all future presidents, not simply President Trump. So I think this is a win for the Constitution, it's a win for the American people, and it's a win for democracy.
Professor Hutchinson, there's something that comes out of one of the concurring opinions. This is from Justice Thomas, and it relates to something we talked about on this broadcast just a couple weeks ago, where Judge Cannon in Florida held a hearing, and a lot of commentators called it unprecedented that she would have this hearing not just on the documents, but actually had oral argument in her courtroom about whether or not Jack Smith has the authority or was properly or lawfully appointed as special counsel. And we predicted then that could be an issue that could find its way up to the Supreme Court. If she were to say, I don't think he has been appointed properly. That's going to be appealed, and then it would naturally make its way up to the Supreme Court on an issue like that. We're seeing a little bit of telegraphing from Justice Thomas where he sits on this issue, and he writes in his concurrence, in this case, the Attorney General purported to appoint a private citizen as special counsel to prosecute a former president on behalf of the United States. But I am not sure that any office for the special counsel has, quote, been established by law as the Constitution requires. By requiring that Congress create federal offices, quote, by law, the Constitution imposes an important check against the president. He cannot create offices at his pleasure. If there's no law establishing that office that the special counsel occupies, then he cannot proceed with this prosecution. And he even goes on to say, if this unprecedented prosecution is to proceed, it must be conducted by someone duly authorized to do so by the American people. So we see a Supreme Court justice taking on an issue that's a very live issue in a court in Florida right now. Judge Cannon has not ruled on that yet. But what's your take on what Justice Thomas decided to reveal here about his thoughts on the office of special counsel?
Well, several takes. Number one, Justice Thomas is telegraphing an issue before Judge Cannon's court. That's number one. Number two, I think Justice Thomas is correct. More likely than not, Jack Smith was not duly appointed consistent with the United States Constitution. If Justice Thomas is correct, then all of the cases brought by Jack Smith should fall apart, and you would then need to appoint a different individual who would, I think, have to go before a grand jury and to bring these cases in the future. So this means at the end of the day, I think, at least from Justice Thomas' perspective, that all of these cases fall away. And as Jay pointed out correctly, I think, the Georgia case goes away, the Jack Smith case in Florida goes away, and the election interference case goes away. And so I think at the end of the day, what have we seen? We have seen a waste of millions upon millions of dollars in the prosecution of a former president. And there is no legal or constitutional basis for these prosecutions.
Do you think they go away regardless if President Trump wins re-election?
I think that is. I think that is. I think that is.
A lot of people are obviously saying if he wins, a lot of these are dead. But so whether he wins or loses, these cases should go away. And it provides basically an object lesson for any future president. Yeah. If you are going to appoint a special counsel, make sure that special counsel was duly appointed. Yeah. Otherwise, it is a waste of time. And typically, as we have seen with Jack Smith, virtually everything he does is a waste of time. President Trump just posted on Truth Social, big win for democracy today. We'll be right back with more on Seculo.
Some people think champions are born, that it's a title that requires something only a handful can ever possess.
There are times in our lives that we are called, every one of us, to step up and serve a cause greater than ourselves.
Even when the loudest voices in the room say it's wrong, that it can't be done. It can be a difficult stand, but it's one any of us can make, including you.
You can be the change. You can make that difference.
You can be a champion. We cannot do what we do without you.
By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life.
A champion of liberty, a champion of freedom.
Please join us. Become an ACLJ champion today.
Welcome back to Secular. We're now joined by Senior Advisor for National Security and Foreign Policy, Rick Grinnell, who joins us here each and every week. But today, big Supreme Court victory comes out for President Trump. But I wanted to get your thoughts, Rick, first on this win out of the Supreme Court for President Trump and the immunity decision. Your thoughts, just give me your thoughts in general. We'll go from there.
I mean, look, I think most people are sitting, listening to the Supreme Court decision and saying it's common sense, right? Donald Trump has immunity for everything he did as president because that is common sense. Of course he should, because he's got to make the best decisions. Sometimes those are tough decisions. But the personal aspect is where I think the left is going to try to wiggle their way in. But as president, there's not much that you're making that is personal. Everything you're doing is about the job because you are president of the United States. This seems like common sense to me, but seeing the left completely melt down with really crazy radical theories, I think that what so many people on the left did is they just read the minority opinion and they didn't read the majority opinion, and now they're screaming about the slippery slope of the minority opinion. But I think what people have to recognize is that the minority opinion, they lost. There were 3 of them, and 6 judges said, no, you're wrong. And so the majority opinion is what rules the day. And I think people just need to calm down, read it. It's full of common sense. It makes sense to the average person.
It should be good for all presidents moving forward, not just President Trump and all presidents previously.
Right. Specifically previously, because it's talking about former presidents in that point. But Rick, my question is, do you think we've seen this before, that when the left gets opinions out of the Supreme Court that they don't like, their first thing to do is to attack the institution and say, we need to pack the court so that we can only get opinions that go our way, which is seems to be the most effective way to preserve democracy, which is what they're so concerned about. But if you look at what come out today, and knowing that we are now in the heat of the campaign season, heading up to the convention for the Republicans here at the end of the month, and then a little bit later for the Democrats, do you think now maybe they're shifting a little bit more away from their angst against Israel and maybe turn it back at the Supreme Court on the left?
Look, I think that this today's Democratic Party is so radical, so left, that they don't even know what to attack. Every day it's something different. And if you would have told me that the Democratic Party was going to stand for more than 2 genders, an open border, more wars, you could just go through the list of things where they're going after their political opponents. They're trying to jail their political opponents. Today, Steve Bannon goes to jail. I mean, literally, this radical party, today's Democratic Party, needs to be defeated. They can't be compromised with. You can't come to some sort of a middle ground with people that are this radical. And I think that the Democratic Party needs to have an inward conversation about what they stand for. They've lost the middle, they've lost common sense, and they must be defeated to show them that they've got to come back to the middle. I mean, for people who are watching this election, we can't have a Democratic Party that literally is trying to say that there are more than 2 genders, and yet they're mocking people for, some sort of science denial. They've become our worst nightmares when it comes to denying common sense, denying the facts. And so what they need to be shown is that the American people reject them resoundingly in November. And then they'll have an internal conversation and fix their issues and hopefully come back and try to fight for the middle class so we can have a conversation about what's good for the middle class.
Yeah, let's take a phone call, actually, so we can also talk about what's going on with this situation with President Biden, obviously, as the post-debate fallout still happening pretty strong. Let's go to Sherry, who's calling on line 4. In Oregon, you're on the air.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for all you do. My question is, how can they change candidates in the middle of, after all the primaries and everybody voting for Biden that wanted to, how can they change to a different candidate if he steps down even when nobody has voted for the next person? And
Sherry, there is a process. There's a process that can be done. We'll go into that in a second while we have Rick, though. But Rick, you don't, as of last week, you think it is too late for that.
Yeah, look, I think it's too late. I mean, Sherry's question is a good one as to how can they do it. Well, they could do it because they would suspend reality. They would suspend the rules and throw out common sense. and manipulate the process to the point where everybody would say, wait a minute, you knew he was, I'm never going to buy that the media just found out on Thursday that Joe Biden has early stage dementia. They've been telling us that we're wrong and that it's a cheap fake video every time we've pointed it out for the last 3 years. I actually think the media are complicit in this pyramid scheme. The whole thing came crashing down because the media and the establishment in Washington were trying to trick us, and no one was coming forward to pull the curtain back from behind like Wizard of Oz to say, look what's happening. On Thursday, they could no longer keep up their charade. The whole pyramid scheme came crashing down. So now what we've got to do is hold them to account, hold them to the democratic process that they claim that they want to see. If they want to change horses right now, after their primary is over, they should be told that they can't do it. They had this opportunity. Joe Biden is their candidate. And I believe that if Joe Biden did step back, it's not an easy decision for the Democrats. Kamala is going to try to take the job, and then a whole bunch of people are going to try to challenge it. They only have 7 weeks before the convention. So time is ticking.
Yeah, it's not whether I've never seen anything that felt more calculated in my life on the press. When it went from here's the preview to the debate happens, and then all of a sudden, an entire panel on CNN have all decided in the same moment. No one's defending him, but also I was telling Will, and I believe this in our audience, that President Biden has worked 90 years practically to become the president of the United States. He's a career politician. This is not a guy who you probably are going to easily be able to convince to not run. I mean, let's just take the politics aside that we don't agree with him. This is not, these kind of characters do not easily just go away.
Yeah. Look, I have to be honest with you, Logan. I'm on the front lines here, and what Jack Smith and this DOJ have done to me, what they've done to President Trump, what they've done to my friends. When I see the media literally lying for the Biden team, I don't feel sorry for them one iota. They made this bed. They picked this guy. They tried to dupe us. And I don't feel sorry for people who have manipulated the system completely. And I just want to say that because I think there are those of us on the front lines who have experienced this. You know, I've paid a lot of money to defend myself in court for ridiculous, dumb lawsuits that are lawfare coming after me. And I know a whole bunch of my friends that have spent tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to defend against these ridiculous claims. And so when I saw this come crashing down, my only thought was, this is what they deserved. They sowed this, and now they must reap it.